He said it like a joke, like a man throwing out a dare he never expected anyone foolish enough to take. He did not know I had nothing left to lose, and he had absolutely no idea who he was laughing at. The Hartwell Foundation Gala was the kind of event where the champagne cost more than most people's rent, and Wren Castellano had spent the last 2 hours standing near the dessert table like furniture, the way she always did at these things. At 29, Wren was a plus-size museum curator who had been dragged to this particular gala by her mother for exactly one reason: to be paraded in front of eligible men who took one look at her soft curves and immediately remembered an urgent phone call they needed to make. Or a deep sapphire blue gown that her best friend had talked her into, a dress that hugged her wide hips and the generous curve of her stomach instead of hiding it, and for the first hour she had actually felt beautiful. Then her mother's voice found her across the ballroom, sharp and carrying. "Wren, darling, come meet the Hartwell boy," her mother called, practically dragging a sweating young finance bro by the elbow. "He's single, he's got a trust fund, and frankly at your age, you cannot afford to be picky." The finance bro looked at Wren the way a man looks at a dessert menu he has already decided is too rich for him. "I'm actually seeing someone," he lied badly, already backing away. "Lovely to meet you, though." Her mother sighed loud enough for the entire West Wing to hear. "This is why I tell you to skip the breadbasket, Wren." The humiliation of it settled into Wren's chest like a stone, the same stone that had been there since she was 16 years old and her mother first started commenting on her plate at family dinners. She excused herself, slipping toward the edge of the dance floor where the string quartet had just shifted into a slow, formal waltz, the kind nobody under 60 actually knew how to dance anymore. That was when she heard the laughter. Low, rich, entirely too confident, coming from a knot of men near the bar who were watching the dance floor with the particular cruelty of people who have never once been laughed at themselves. "Look at that," one of them said, gesturing toward an older couple gliding badly through the steps. "A masterclass in how not to waltz. I'd pay good money to see someone actually do it right tonight." The man standing closest to him, the one with the dangerously still posture and a tailored black suit that probably cost more than the chandelier above them, smiled the kind of smile that did not reach his eyes. "Money's boring, Salvatore. Let's make it interesting." He raised his voice just enough to carry, just enough to be heard by half the room. "Whoever can actually waltz properly tonight, really waltz, not this geriatric shuffling, I will marry them. Tomorrow. I'm that confident nobody in this room can do it." The group around him roared with laughter. Someone clapped him on the back. "Bold words from Lazarus Drăgan," someone called out. And a ripple of unease moved through the nearby guests, because everyone in that ballroom knew exactly who Lazarus Drăgan was. He did not run a hedge fund. He ran half the ports on the eastern seaboard, and the men who crossed him tended to become rumors rather than people. Did not know any of that yet. All she knew was that she had spent 4 years training in competitive ballroom dance before her mother decided it was an embarrassing hobby for a girl her size, and that something hot and reckless was rising in her chest after an entire night of being treated like an inconvenience. She walked straight onto the dance floor and held out her hand to him. "I'll dance it," she said. The laughter around them sputtered out so fast it was almost funny. Lazarus turned, clearly expecting to find someone joining in on the joke, and instead found a woman in sapphire blue staring at him with her chin lifted and her hand steady, not a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Excuse me," he said, his accent curling faintly around the words. "I said, I'll dance it. You offered marriage to whoever could waltz properly. I am offering to take you up on it, unless the great Lazarus Drăgan only makes promises he doesn't expect to keep." Color rose in Salvatore's face on Lazarus's behalf. A few of the men actually snickered, clearly expecting her to be a punchline. Lazarus's dark eyes swept over her once, slow and assessing, the kind of look that made most women shrink. Wren did not shrink. She had spent her whole life being looked at like a problem to be solved, and she was done flinching from it. "Very well," Lazarus said finally. something unreadable moving behind his expression as he extended his hand. "Let's see what you've got, Tesoro." The quartet, sensing the sudden electricity in the room, slid into a proper Viennese waltz, the real thing, fast 3/4 time that separated people who had actually trained from people who had just watched a few movies. Lazarus placed his hand at the small of her back, testing her, clearly expecting her to stumble within 4 bars. She did not stumble. Wren matched his frame instantly, her spine straight, her chin lifted exactly the way her old instructor used to scream at her about, and when he led into the first turn, she followed it perfectly, her sapphire skirt flaring out in a wide, controlled sweep that drew gasps from the crowd that had been laughing at her 30 seconds earlier. Lazarus's eyebrows rose fractionally. He picked up the pace, testing her again, throwing in a faster rotation meant to throw an amateur off balance. She matched that too. Full minutes, in front of 300 of New York's wealthiest and most cruel, Wren Castellano and Lazarus Drăgan moved across that ballroom floor like they had been dancing together their entire lives, her curves and his broad frame cutting through the space with a precision that left the room dead silent except for the music. Her mother stood frozen near the bar, her mouth slightly open. The finance bro who had run from Wren 20 minutes earlier watched with an expression of pure, useless regret. When the final note dropped, Lazarus dipped her low, one hand splayed firm against her back, and the ballroom exploded into applause so loud it rattled the chandeliers. He pulled her back up slowly, close enough that only she could hear him. "Where did you learn to dance like that?" he asked, and for the first time all night his voice had lost every trace of mockery. 4 years of competitive ballroom before my mother decided it was embarrassing for someone my size. I never stopped practicing. I just stopped having anyone to practice with. Something shifted in his face, dark and considering. He did not let go of her hand. "I made a promise in front of 300 witnesses," he said quietly, "including several men who would very much enjoy watching me break my word so they could use it against me. Do you understand what that means? I understand you're trying to find a polite way out of a joke that backfired." "No," he said, and the certainty in his voice startled her. "It means I am a man of my word, Tesoro, and you have just become considerably more interesting to me than a joke ever was. Have dinner with me, tonight, before either of us decides what tomorrow looks like." Her mother appeared at her elbow before she could answer, practically vibrating with a sudden, nauseating enthusiasm. "Wren, darling, I had no idea you still danced. You should have said something. And Mr. Drăgan, what a wonderful surprise. We'd be absolutely delighted to discuss arrangements whenever—" "There are no arrangements to discuss with you," Lazarus said, his tone dropping several degrees in an instant, the warmth he'd shown Wren completely gone. "Whatever happens next is between Wren and myself. You may go back to the bar now." Her mother's mouth snapped shut so fast her teeth clicked, and she retreated without another word, for possibly the first time in Wren's entire life. They left the gala together in a black car that smelled like cedar and leather, and Wren spent the first 10 minutes of the ride waiting for the catch, waiting for him to mention her size the way every man eventually did, waiting for the charm to curdle into something crueler once the audience was gone. It never came. Instead, Lazarus simply watched her with an expression she did not yet have a name for, something between fascination and hunger, and something gentler underneath both. "You're waiting for me to insult you," he said eventually, far too perceptive for her comfort. "You're waiting for the part where I tell you that you danced well for a woman your size. I've heard worse. I've heard better disguised." Fully toward her, his jaw tight. "Then, let me say this clearly once, so you never have to wonder again. I watched you walk onto that dance floor after a room full of idiots laughed at you, and you did not apologize for taking up space. You took the entire floor and made every person in that ballroom regret their laughter. I have buried men for showing me less courage than that." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and he seemed to understand that silence was its own kind of answer. Rest of the night, into a private dining room above one of his restaurants in the financial district, into hours of conversation that had nothing to do with marriage bets or ballroom floors, about the museum exhibit she was curating, about the small Romanian village he'd left at 19 with nothing but a duffel bag and a chip on his shoulder, the size of a continent. By the time the sun came up over the East River, Wren understood two things with total clarity. The first was that Lazarus Drăgan was exactly as dangerous as the rumors claimed. The second was that she did not particularly care. The trouble arrived 4 days later, in the form of Salvatore, the man from the bar who had laughed loudest at the original joke and apparently never gotten over the embarrassment of being proven wrong. Wren was leaving the museum after a late shift when his car pulled up beside her, the door already open, two men flanking her before she fully registered what was happening. "Get in," Salvatore said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "Lazarus needs to learn that his decisions have consequences, and you're going to help me teach him." She did not get in quietly. She fought, clawed, screamed loud enough that a security guard came running, but 2 against 1 in an empty parking garage was not a fight she could win, and within minutes she was in the back of a car being driven somewhere she did not recognize. Her phone smashed on the pavement behind her. Lazarus found out 19 minutes later when the museum's head of security, badly shaken, finally got through to a number Wren had given him in case of emergency. Lazarus was in the middle of a board meeting. He did not finish his sentence. He simply stood up, said 2 words to Matteo waiting by the door, "Find her," and walked out of a room full of men who had been terrified to be in his presence 5 minutes earlier. What followed was the kind of night that later became a quiet legend among the people who worked for Lazarus Drăgan, the kind of story told in hushed voices, never to outsiders. He did not call the police. He called every dock foreman, every warehouse manager, every favor he had banked over 15 years of careful, ruthless empire building, and Manhattan effectively stopped moving for 3 hours while his men turned over every property Salvatore had ever touched. They found her in the basement of an old print shop in Queens, tied to a folding chair, her dress torn at the shoulder, a bruise already blooming along her jaw where Salvatore had backhanded her for refusing to call Lazarus and beg. Lazarus came down the stairs alone. The 2 men guarding her did not even raise their weapons before Matteo, 2 steps behind him, put both of them on the ground without breaking stride. Lazarus knelt in front of her chair, his hands shaking as he cut through the rope binding her wrists, his eyes never leaving the bruise on her face. "I'm here," he said, his voice cracking in a way she suspected very few people had ever heard. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I should have had someone watching you from the first night." "I'm okay," she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true yet. Salvatore appeared at the top of the stairs, a gun in his trembling hand, his earlier confidence completely gone. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," he shouted down at them. "You made me a joke because some fat curator beat your ego in a dance contest." Lazarus rose slowly, positioning his own body fully between Salvatore and Wren's chair, without a hint of hesitation. His voice gone cold and flat, in a way that made the temperature in the basement feel like it dropped 10 degrees. "You put your hands on the woman I intend to marry," Lazarus said. "That is not humiliation, Salvatore. That is a death sentence, and you wrote it yourself the moment you touched her." Salvatore fired once, wildly, the bullet burying itself in the wall a foot above their heads, and before he could fire again, Matteo was already on the stairs, disarming him with brutal efficiency, sending the gun skidding harmlessly across the concrete floor. Lazarus did not even flinch at the gunshot. He had already turned his attention back to Wren, gathering her carefully into his arms, lifting her out of the chair like she weighed nothing at all, like the only thing that mattered in that entire basement was getting her somewhere warm and safe as quickly as possible. "What happens to him is not your concern," Lazarus murmured against her hair as he carried her up the stairs, past Salvatore now pinned face down on the concrete by 2 of his men. "What happens to you is the only thing that has ever mattered." She did not ask what happened to Salvatore after that. She suspected, somewhere deep down, that she did not actually want to know, and that the people of New York would simply notice his particular brand of cruelty was no longer a feature of the city's nightlife. 3 weeks later, Wren stood in front of a mirror in a dress that had nothing to do with sapphire blue or dance floors, a soft ivory gown tailored exactly to her curves, no corsetry trying to apologize for her body, just clean, elegant lines that made her look, for the first time in her entire life, like exactly who she was meant to be. Lazarus appeared in the doorway behind her, watching her reflection with the same unreadable intensity he'd had the night they first danced. "You don't have to do this because of a joke that got out of hand," she said quietly, watching him in the mirror. "Nobody would blame you for letting an embarrassing bet just disappear." "It was never a joke to me, not after the first turn," Lazarus said, crossing the room to stand behind her, his hand settling at her waist with a reverence that still occasionally caught her off guard. "I made that bet expecting to laugh at whoever was foolish enough to try. Instead, I found the only person who has ever made me want to keep a promise simply because it was the right thing to do, not because I had to. You did not just win a dance that night, Tesoro. You won an argument I did not even know I was having with myself about what kind of man I actually wanted to be." "And what kind of man is that?" she asked, turning to face him. "The kind who marries the woman who outdanced him in front of 300 witnesses," Lazarus said, a real smile finally breaking across his face, dangerous and warm all at once, "and spends the rest of his life making sure nobody ever laughs at her again." He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that settled every doubt she had carried with her since she was 16 years old, standing in her mother's dining room being told to skip the breadbasket. Somewhere outside the room, a string quartet was tuning up for a waltz neither of them had any intention of losing. If you loved watching Wren turn a cruel joke into the beginning of her own fairy tale, smash that like button and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that they should never shrink themselves to fit someone else's idea of who deserves love. Subscribe and ring the bell for more intense, gripping mafia romance stories. What would you have done in Wren's shoes? Tell me in the comments below.